Um, if I look at DevSecOps, right? I mean, it's kind of a new phrase or a newer phrase, and really it's just the inclusion of security within DevOps practices, right? And so what does that actually mean? Well, it's about taking the collection of everything and looking at security and enhancing all the way through, rather than just at the end point or thinking as an afterthought. It's really about kind of putting it all in there. So what that really means for you as the ISVs is to look at, you're going to look at, if you think of it like a cake, it's not the icing on the top. It's something that you bake throughout, right? It's integrated within the process. And so when you look at security, it should be a consideration that's happening all along each of the cycle, and not just happening at the very end. And that's really going to help out when you start looking at making the software development and these apps and different bits more secure in general. I've got a quote here from Michael Hayden, who's the former director of the NSA and the CIA, and I thought it was really relevant in the sense that what he's saying is that one, you're going to be involved in this, whether you kind of thought you were or wanted to, or any of that. Security is something that everybody's now concerned with, and and with the amount of state-funded hacking and all the bits that are happening on that side of things, there's just too much happening for you not to kind of take this into consideration, and for this to not be a big consideration for not just yourselves, but your clients, for your vendors, for everybody to really take on hand. And so I wanted to kind of talk about kind of how that's changed over time. IT security is really complex. There's loads of devices and users and applications and different bits in every environment. There's loads of vendors. There's loads of bits that you have to take into consideration. And in the past, we kind of had that trusted network, that walled garden view of, we could just build this big wall around our environment and it was safe. Everything within that, you didn't really kind of put a lot of effort and thought into. Really what that was is you've put this big wall around everything. You're protected. You didn't really worry about that. And I think, over time, that was slowly changing, and COVID really, escalated a consideration that was already in play, of this idea of working remote and working from home. And so, before, you had hackers and all they were doing was kind of attacking that walled garden. But now that you've got everybody moving out and working remote, and you've got BYOD, you've got all of these sorts of things that have been kind of expedited by COVID. This really kind of starts to accentuate the point that these hackers have looked at shifting, and now they go towards the users. And let's be honest, the users in most cases don't always have the best security in place. They don't always think about security as a necessary bit, or they think they're covered because they've got an antivirus running or something like that, and so they don't really take consideration in depth. And this is where then kind of falls to a lot of onus around IT, around security teams, around the applications themselves, to start looking at that. And it's because this shift has happened, a lot of the security teams are getting overwhelmed. And so you have to start looking at things that you can use to automate this, rather than making it a manual process. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the different bits around that, and around how automation can help, and what that looks like. So kind of starting off, if we keep a few things in mind, and these are kind of the areas that I'll be covering. Again, this is just a real brief whistle stop tour as we kind of go through, so it's not meant to kind of drive into. But if we look at kind of zero trust, this is where the industry is going. This is where a lot of bits are happening around Microsoft and others. Oh, sorry, this is on a timer of some sort. So the idea is that the vendors are moving all towards this, and this is becoming kind of the norm across the board. Then we look at DevSecOps in Azure specifically. So there's a lot of products within Azure that you can use that are there, that Microsoft has been developing. I won't go into depth about kind of how much money they're investing and all that. I mean, the guys did a great job covering a lot of that. But Microsoft invest a load into this side of things, and then other products from Microsoft, like things that kind of sit outside that you can look at as well, that might not be specifically Azure, but sit in that same kind of realm. So if we talk about Zero Trust, now Zero Trust is really built around from the Open Group. They've started that as kind of a standard, as a core principle, and everybody started to kind of pick up on that and start to use that. And as we see here, this is kind of their interpretation of the principles. But these are the buckets that they kind of put that Zero Trust in, and the things that you need to consider as you're starting to not just develop, but just roll security out in general. And there's lots of bits around here that are, around the organization, around the technology, but then around governance as well. So there's things about for the users, there's risk, there's bits that you need to kind of take a look at and look at the full life cycle of development as where security can fit in, and how it will work for you as an organization. So Microsoft also has kind of their own principles, and these are based off of that Open Group. And so what they've done is this idea that you verify explicitly. So things like identity, device health, that becomes very important. So the idea that you can develop something on one set and just of devices and leave it there forever just isn't going to hold going forward. You're going to have to start looking at how do we make sure that it stays relevant as the devices get updated and changed over time. And even things just like normal Windows updates that happen quite frequently, everything's being tied into those updates, and security is really being built around those updates being evergreen. So, again, it's you can kind of fall a version or two behind on a Windows 10 update, but that's about it nowadays. It then starts to get flagged as this is a security risk when you start falling kind of 2, 3, 4 updates behind just on Windows 10 alone. Then you look at other things like your antivirus, your Edge. All of those are tied into this idea of continually being updated. Data classification also becomes very, very important, and we're starting to see a lot more of this, especially around with the government agencies and different public sector groups, and they're starting to look at how do they classify different bits of data. The use of least privilege is changing how we give access to people and how we view that. And the days of old where you kind of go, I've got somebody coming in, I'll just grant him rights until whenever he gets done or she gets done, they get done with whatever work they're doing, and then I'll go and turn it off and try to remember to do so, has now changed to it's only going to start when they come in, so they're only going to get it when they absolutely need it. It's only going to be enough access, so I'm not going to give them blanket access. I'm only going to give them exactly what they need to do the job, and when it's done, it's going to turn off, for itself, and that makes it really important to keep in mind for how you're granting access to the different bits of your applications and softwares. And the last bit is to assume breach. So this is really important in the sense of segmenting, and I've got a little bit deeper where we talk a little bit more, but it's around assuming the breach but not leaving everything wide open. And so it's about segmenting that environment so that they don't get access to everything, and you kind of have walls along the way. So I'm not going to go through this. I mean, this is a bit of an eye chart, and I believe everybody's going to get a copy of this slide as well. That the bit there that says in Azure doc page, that's the link to the actual page that I pulled this from. But I thought it was interesting to pull in of how that process and that flow could work, within the software lifecycle, in the sense of using Active Directory, using things like GitHub and pipelines and containers and the end user and multi-factor and all that, and where you could tie different bits in and where different bits should go, how they should tie in, looking at things like Kubernetes and containers and what needs to tie into that, really important bits like Key Vault and policy and things like that, and how that all kind of starts to tie into, the process that you could put together in more detail. So again, I'm not going to read through all these, but this was just to give you an example flow of how things could move through and what that might look like. Some big key concepts. So I put concepts, but really what these are things that you really need to make sure you either understand or can drive and make sure either the third parties you work with or your employees really get. And so it's things like AD, like we talked about, understanding authentication and RBAC, PIM, GitHub, so that becomes really important. Azure boards, you can start using those to manage how you're moving things through. Azure policy is a separate product, which we'll touch on. Infrastructure as a code was brought up, and again, that's quite important. And looking at pipelines, so Azure Pipeline, these are all products that you can be using to really make sure that you're getting the most out of security that you can, and things like Azure Monitor and Azure Security. So the Security Center, Sentinel, Defender, Monitor, these are all products that are really good to have on hand and make sure that you want to integrate with, because these are going to give you that kind of pane of glass to really not just effectively use to monitor and to look at what you're doing, but also to use these features that you have available already. So some different bits that you can think of is things that was already kind of touched about, but using GitHub to secure your code and run against and use. Again, track your work with Azure boards. So this is a great way to manage that workflow through. And make sure that you've got things, and that's a little bit like Slack and those that are out there, but all within the Azure kind of umbrella. Deploy containers with pipelines. Again, this is all just about control, about looking at what you have and making sure that you've got all the fundamental bits that you need as you roll things out, so that it isn't just ad hoc every time that you do it. Run and debug containers with dev spaces. So again, using these automation tools will help find problems and find issues that you might miss or that users might miss. Enforcing that container security. So that becomes really important when you start talking about like governance of the users and the people that are building and the devs, making sure that people are following this process and they're doing what they should be doing. And then ultimately managing those identities and that access with Azure is a really great way and an easier way than trying to do it ad hoc, but just doing it through the identities of AD make things much easier and flow easier. Using Key Vault is a really great little function to control a lot of the secrets that you have. So, keys and secrets and bits that you keep within Key Vault, you can really lock down who has access to that. I'm making sure that it isn't something that's open to everybody. So you can really lock in, where that control is and make sure that, only the people that need it have it. And if other people need access to it, they can grant that through, through the users that own that bit. And then obviously monitoring your applications by using Monitor. And that's a great way. We're advising a lot of our customers to use Monitor. It's a great single pane of glass around the environment, around the applications, and really gives you that visibility. It gives you alerts, it gives you reporting, so you can do quite a bit around Monitor and really kind of bring that out. Some of the metrics to keep in mind that you're going to want to apply when you're looking at this in general. And so things like mean time to detection, right? So it's really important that you try to reduce the time that until you know that you've been hacked, right? So it doesn't do you any good if you get hacked and you don't find out for months on end, and they get access to everything. You want to find out as quick as possible. You want to know that it's there. And then you want to be able to recover from that, and so then it's reducing reducing the time that they're in there, but then accelerating the time to recover from that attack, and making sure that you've got enough in place that you can recover very quickly and safely. This is a little bit more in depth around defense in depth. So again, I like to you start to harden layers. I like to use the analogy of a house, and so within a house, you got the front door and the back door, and those keep people out, and that's great, and that works the majority of the time. The idea then is that if somebody breaks in through one of those doors, they're in the house, they've got full access to everything. So when you start hardening in layers, if you think about the house, if every room had a door that locked, and you then shut every one of those doors and locked every one of those doors, all of a sudden that person has to go through and break through each layer, each door to get into each area. Now, that might not stop them. It might not keep them from doing it, but what it might do is slow them down enough to where you can get in and find out that they're there and stop them from getting any farther, rather than all of a sudden they're there and they've got access to everything. So it's really important to keep that in mind when you start looking at that kind of idea of defense in depth, right? Is hardening of those layers. And then lastly, is that post breach. So after all of that's how happened, after you've recovered and everything's back up and running, to do that analysis of what's happened of the breach, how did they get in, what happened. It's not about pointing blame. It's not about any of that. It's about making sure that you plug those gaps, right? Maybe it was something in the code. Maybe it was something somebody left on. It's about and you need to put governance around that. It's about finding out where that issue happened and what left open that they got in, so that you can close that so that nobody else gets in the future. And it might lead to other things that you find beforehand. And just to give you an idea, I like to use the idea of Microsoft. So Microsoft do war games, and they have a huge area within their Redmond offices where they have a red team and a blue team. And they do this. So the red team spends their entire day attacking Azure. And these aren't test sites; they're attacking live Azure sites. They're attacking, Azure to breach and to gain access. And their bonuses are built around breaching and how deep they can get. On the reverse side, you got the blue team, and the blue team are playing defense. And what they do is they try, once a hack happens, they have to detect it, and then they have to stop it, and then they have to plug the hole. And they get bonuses on how fast they detect and how fast they can stop it and get the hacker out and plug that hole. And so both sides are really integrated into doing both. But what that does is it gives Microsoft a huge leg up in the industry, where a lot of companies wouldn't have that capability to make sure that they're on top of any holes, any breaches, anything that might randomly get found. They've got guys already looking for it. That's their old job. So I always kind of imagine, I was kind of dating myself, but war games from with Matthew Broderick back in the day, of guys hacking in and stuff. And I find it quite interesting. So some of the products to keep in mind. So there's a few big ones. There's Azure Blueprints, Azure Policy, and Microsoft Defender for Cloud. There's one other one, which is Sentinel, which we'll talk about in a minute. But under these, Azure Blueprint is really kind of how it sounds on the tin, right? It's about building out a blueprint or creating this blueprint that gives you a repeatable way to roll things out, to make sure everything's covered. Somebody didn't forget, to add something in, or to do something in a certain way, or to set up a certain firewall, whatever it might be, because the blueprint states, pretty much directions on how you do it every single time. With Azure Policy, this allows you to create and assign and manage policies. These policies then will look to enforce these rules on the resources. So again, this allows that to stay compliant. It manages that. It enforces things like tagging. It enforces things like certain region deployments. All of these things you can build into Azure Policy. And what the great thing is that it's not just about, oh, did you read the policy? It actually enforces that in policy, so they have to do things, or flags if they don't. So again, it gives you some great insight into what's happening and where. And finally, Defender for Cloud. So this is, Microsoft's big play around security in general for Azure, for Office 365 or M365, and really this is, this is really important around staying, using and staying on top of security. This is a pre-built-in, pre-canned security package that you can use. And there's loads of features and loads of different bits of Defender that you can use and integrate in. And we'll be talking a lot about that, I think, next week, or next week during our security week. We'll be driving in, one of our guys will be driving into that in a lot more depth. But there's a lot built into that I wouldn't discount that. So Microsoft Sentinel is the kind of the big cloud-based SIEM or security event and incident manager. And the idea around this was Microsoft wanted something that you could use in the cloud. It doesn't have to just be cloud products, but that you could use in the cloud that was cheaper than rolling out an entire SOC yourself, right? Which becomes cost prohibitive on on a real base scale of trying to design a SOC from scratch. And so what it does is it collects everything. It collects data from across the board, your entire environment. It doesn't matter if it's on premise or in the cloud. It collects it from all the devices, all the users, everything in there. It collects all of that stuff and creates all of these logs. It then uses threat intelligence analytics to go through those logs and start uncovering threats. And what the idea is that it wants to minimize as much as it can the false positives. This helps drive down some of that noise and really helps with being able to find the relevant stuff rather than a load of false positive, a load of noise that's coming through. You're still going to get a lot of information. So I do want to stress that is that this doesn't drive it down to a couple bits. You still get lots and lots of information from that. But then it's also about using the database that Microsoft's built over the years around security and AI to check against a lot of those common logs, common issues, common problems, common features, all of those sorts of things, and look for anything suspicious by using the database that already exists. So you're not creating it from scratch. Some of that you will do, and some of that will come over time, but you'll have access to Microsoft's database of activities. Sorry, that you'll immediately be able to use and have access to. So you'll start seeing a lot of benefit from the initial get-go. And then building in orchestration. So there's a lot of automation bits that you can do on a small scale so that it isn't just all manual. There will be some manual things as well. But you'll be able to automate some of that, and that will help with trying to respond to security issues in general. Oh, excuse me. So lastly, I'm just going to talk briefly about managed services, and then I think that'll kind of end my time. And this is about, why would you look at this? Well, it's, again, you're going to get a lot of information from things like Sentinel and Monitor in different places, and having eyes on is really important. And you can get 24/7 eyes on through a managed service that you couldn't do maybe on your own, and hiring and dealing with that. So this here will allow you to have that kind of 24/7 monitoring of the data from Sentinel, from different devices, and identifying that and maintaining that environment for you, and working hand in hand with IT to make sure that it isn't just disconnected, that you're involved in that. And then reducing the noise. Like I said, you get loads and loads and loads of logs. And this, the idea is that this will save you from that alert fatigue, that you're not constantly getting alerted with, hundreds and hundreds of logs, false positives, those sorts of things. You're only going to get alerted when something's a problem, and you're needed to kind of resolve that. So that helps reduce some of that noise and keeps you focused on the things that you want to be focused on, and so that you're not constantly checking on within the security. Oops, wrong button. And then lastly, it's about having the capabilities of a SOC without having a SOC. And so, again, this gives you the experts on hand It gives you 24/7, and you don't have to pay or manage, for having a team and maintain that team internally and make sure they're up to date with the latest certifications and all that. All that's covered through a managed service and gives you that capability to do what you need to do, and stay focused on that. And security becomes part of that process, but it doesn't become overwhelming for you.